History 101, Lecture 16, 19th Century Reform. This video will talk about the definition of reform, 19th century reform. So Lecture 16, 19th century reform. We would like to define what do we mean when we say 19th century reform movements. Some historians call this era the Benevolent Empire. So, what does that mean? This era of reform from the 18 teens to 1840s is mainly a northern urban middle and upper class movement that sought to focus Americans on reforming American culture in society. One interesting thing about these 19th century reform movements, women's historians get all excited about this, is that there's a lot of women that participated in these 19th century reform movements. One historian described it as that women went out the back door to reform society. So the argument is that women excluded from political influence had their influence felt in other ways through all the reform movements in the 19th century. The other thing I want us to get out of the definition of this 19th century era of reform, this benevolent empire, is notice the era of society being affected. The Second Great Awakening, mainly Western, Midwest today, but Western, rural, lower class movement. At the same time, you have northern, urban, middle and upper class individuals reforming society in different ways. And so notice how those puzzle pieces fit together. The more rural, Western, lower class part of society, American society, you see the Second Great Awakening. In urban, middle and upper class, northern, you see this benevolent empire, this era of reform where, and interestingly enough, that's what are all these ministers? These ministers are going to the West, to the frontier, to what? To reform frontier society. They left troops back home. So it's kind of that same impetus. We've got to reform society. American culture has been created. Remember Lecture 11? American culture has been created. We've defined it. And now so some look at that box or that target and go, we don't like it. They see a change. And again, going back to women, for women's historians, this kind of fits in with this idea of the 18th century idea of Republican motherhood. The 19th century idea of separate spheres. Men and women have different spheres, equal but separate spheres of influence. And so for women's historians, this idea that, if the ideal middle and upper class society says women should, build a home, raise children, create a home, and so some of those women go out the back door and reform society. And so that's some interesting characteristics of this 19th century era of reform.